Okay, welcome back to the podcast. We have Lauren Aletta today, and we're going to dive into shadow. This is a topic that I feel like every time we've had a conversation, we sort of like touch on it, and then we'll be like, the last time we brought up doing a whole, because it is something that I feel like there's so much to say. And it's a
Hmm.
topic that a lot of people avoid for a lot of different reasons within themselves. And so I'm really excited to go into this. And I guess for anybody listening, I'll probably put it in the intro too, but like disclaimer, it could go dark, it could go deep. And so just, I guess, if you're listening and you feel uncomfortable, feel free to, skip or whatever, but we're going to do it. So I
Good.
guess we'll start with, I guess, just like defining what shadow is for people that are listening, and then like how we can maybe identify it within ourselves, and we can just go from there.
Go from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, even my concept of shadow has developed and developed and developed and developed. And we focus on, say, our personal shadow, or we could say even collective shadow. It's anything that is, I would say, like repressed, anything that is hidden, anything that is unacknowledged, that we hold within us, or even within then society. So it is whatever it is relegated to, you know, the regions that we don't go and explore and look at. Um, I would say shadow also, the energy of shadow, even though it can come in different expressions. So we could say is like rooted in lack or rooted in fear. So where we have even abandoned ourselves or betrayed ourselves, where we're trying to compensate in some kind of way, people pleasing, all of these they're different sort of characteristics or expressions of shadow, but they are all generally rooted in, some kind of fear or some kind of lack. Um, I would say also that shadow is then a description of a sort of a degraded consciousness or an outdated consciousness. So if I have a like personal, like my own personal shadow, my own personal like deep fear, um, of, let's say, being rejected or being unwanted or not being loved. And I was to engage in coping mechanisms or strategies as a means to receive love. So it could be like manipulation, or it could be, or people pleasing, which is kind of manipulation. Or if I was to have then, instead of trying to coerce people to love me, but I was then instead going into more destructive types of behaviors. So it could go into further isolation or, means to make myself feel better. So different types of behaviors or addictions that are trying to sort of mask my unworthiness. This is the deeper that you go down in any one of those sort of lines, you're starting to get an increase of like degrading your own consciousness. So you're kind of making it worse. But the other way that I would also describe shadow and think, yes, personally, but also collectively, because you can also go always, micro to macro level or individual to collective. We could go bigger than that again too. But it's also when something is outdated. So when a consciousness is outdated, and when we are still defining ourselves or defining our world or defining an area of our life through a belief or some kind of conditioning, a consciousness, a state of consciousness that is actually now smaller. We can no longer fit in it. I would also describe that as shadow, because what is going to happen is the person is going to continue to operate in something that is actually now too small for them, and that's going to be reflected in themselves, their life, their attitudes. Things can get very stagnant, things can get very stuck, and then naturally also potentially degrade from there, or different behaviors can come out of that. Um, I would describe shadow in, and this is more like anthroposophical terms. But as a means to be able to identify each one, they would call one luciferic and aramanic. So luciferic consciousness is, or that is, can motivate shadow in sort of addiction or in this chasing the high, a lot of pleasure, always needing to feel really good, a lot of distraction. It's always like just really sort of high. And even say that toxic positivity and things like that, that's actually luciferic. It's just like always just think good. So that is where you can kind of start to observe the sort of quality of the impulse of what is motivating you. So a person who's always needing to shop and get things to make themselves feel good, or drugs, or alcohol, or always needing to think almost like in delusion, like positively, but in delusion, or just being delusional about their own reality or what might be happening. To avoid actually looking at the reality. That's expressions of like, yeah, a shadow aspect of that can be described with the impulse of Lucifer. And the other one is Ahriman. An Ahrimanic force is more a like materializing, so it's dense, it's cold. And this is when a person can become increasingly hardened and cold and like very disconnected from any feeling. Whereas say Luciferic shadow is like the overindulgence in feeling. It's like big feelings of all the things. Yeah, the other is just cold, hardened. And there can be then a calculatedness to it. There is this lack of empathy that can happen to it, happen with you, or it becomes very strategic. Or so, yeah, you're really what comes out of that is a loss of your own spiritual essence or force. So you're no longer connected to it. Whereas with the Lucifer version of the impulse, you're chasing that. You're chasing to feel always that. Whereas the Aramanical materializing is the reduction of that feeling, and it's then moving more into like technology or control and in those kinds of ways. I'll say a couple other things. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Um, Shadow is held in the astral body. Our shadow, sort of our unprocessed emotions. So when we haven't dealt with our unprocessed emotions or traumatic events, all of that is stored and held in the astral body, which is linked to our nervous system. Um, the astral body is also known as the soul body. And so we have the regions of that. Um, the moon is connected to our soul body or our astral body, and why the moon works with us in being able to reveal our shadow. The moon's also connected to our karma, and we can describe karma in a sense as it can be as a what we're initiating ourselves through in regards to our shadow. So um it gives us an opportunity to really review or redo something. And we might see this as, why does this happen? Why do I have these particular challenges? Why throughout the course of my life, repeated and repeated and repeated, is this ongoing theme? And it's difficult and it hits on my shadow and I find it really hard. So we can have a kind of really negative sort of relationship to that, and we want to fix ourselves or even obsess over it, whereas or want to push it away, not acknowledge it, or do the opposite, dive way too deeply in it, or then meet in the middle of being in the pit of despair over it. I think we do all of those things. But really anything that we could say is our like shadow in that very much reoccurring theme way. And this is where I would say we've got kind of almost different layers of shadow. Shadow can be just unprocessed emotions that sort of really get on top of you and start to weigh you down and needing to be cleared up, affect you in different ways. But then I think that they're at a deeper level, that is shadow that is very acts like a catalyst of initiation, and that is deeply connected to what I would say is our soul purpose, because our soul purpose isn't just this rosy, skipping along, the yellow brick road, kind of thing. Soul purpose is very much also about recognizing, acknowledging, embracing, and working with the shadow that catalyzes us into a sort of higher expression of ourselves. We're further developing and integrating our soul and our spirit, which means that our morals and our thoughts and our relationship to each other and to the world and to even the heavens is deeply changing. And we usually can't do that until we are really facing ourselves off. And seeing the truth of who we are, which is incredibly uncomfortable. We are the sum truth of, our thoughts, actions, and deeds ultimately, or our morals, and even the way in which we can think about another person, or a situation. We might seem one way on the outside, but when it comes to death or going through, the process after death, um, we are seen for the truth of who it is that we really are on the inside. So nothing on the outside is there to act as some kind of distractive, um, material veneer, you could say. Yeah. I could go on. You got Dark Night of the Soul. We were
Yeah.
like, there's a thing, and what I meant initially, which is over the years, just my understanding of shadow has totally, really opened up. And yeah, there are many different facets to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the distinction between you described like the Luciferic and the Aramaic shadows. I've had very few, I mean, well, we've had sessions before. So I think, like I'm very feeling and like shadow for me is, I mean, it's very much a feeling. And there have been a handful of times that I've gotten into that just shut off cold where I just don't feel anything. And when I get to that place, I almost scare myself because it's like,
Yeah.
I feel like when my emotions are turned off like that, it's almost like I'm out of control because
Yeah.
I don't know how to I don't know how to operate without that feeling, right? That's always
Yeah.
like my guide. But
Yeah.
then the extreme other end where in my past where I've, the alcohol, the sex, the drugs, the this, that, and it's like sometimes I'm chasing that pain. Like I want to hurt. It's like I'm
Yes.
chasing the feeling. It's like I have to feel something. And
Yes.
it's probably in a response to being shut off or something that triggered me so
Yes.
much that I had to
Yeah.
detach. And then I threw myself in the other way. Um,
Yes.
but times like that, I feel like destructive is a word that I used to in my mind. I would just think like I'm in that destructive mode where it was just like
Yes.
I didn't care. I just wanted to hurt. I wanted to feel something, and
Yeah.
that's can be a scary place to be in. Like it's rooted in fear, and for me, I think a fear of anger, a fear of rejection or whatever the cause was. And it's like you're just chasing the ability to feel something, even though it
Yeah.
doesn't solve the problem. But I think
I
that
would, sorry, go, yeah.
no, it's just say for me, like when I quit drinking, it was because I
Mm,
was coming to that place so like over and over and over again. And I was just
mm,
like, I was just destructive with my life. And I was just woke up and I was like, I can't be like this anymore. Like something has to
yeah.
change. And so that year that I stopped drinking, I really had to sit with my shadow in those moments where I wanted to go be like that or chase the sex or chase this and just like,
Mm,
in those things. And it was like, okay, why, and that was equally as hard as
mm,
avoiding the shadow, right? Because
mm,
then you have to accept it and see it. And so, but it was a
mm.
powerful year as well.
I was going to say that requires a lot of self-control or spiritual will.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not flexing that spiritual will when you're going out and you're drinking and in the destructive behavior. And then, yes, it got so uncomfortable that you're then making the choice not to drink and be able to sit with it, which is like a certain level of courageousness, and choice. but it's also then, getting hit with those impulses that you still would have been hit with. Life still happens. You still get triggered. If you're going to open the door to shadow, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, here's some, and here's some more, and here's some more.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, whew. And so you're still getting flooded with those impulses, but in that way, you're also starting to learn what those impulses and energies are in you, and you can
Mm-hmm.
start to learn how to work with them, essentially, not use a sense of will and just go away and distract or escape. But that's the other thing with that Luciferic element, it's escapism. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's escapism. And even with the Aramanic one, it's a different type of escapism in the sense of it's just now shut down. It's just like, yep, yeah, yeah.
Like I mean, I don't know, it makes me think of vampires. They like in all like vampire movies, like just flip the switch, turn it off, right? And then they're just like chaos and like murder and all those things like that. But yeah, I don't know. That one, it's so interesting to me to just because I mean it goes somewhere.
What do you mean?
Like
Which one?
if you're in that like Aramaic where like for me it's like I feel nothing. But for me, I
Yeah.
guess like underneath that like feeling nothing is like this intense like anger that's building like slowly. So maybe I'm not completely in that space, but it's like
Mm.
I'm so beyond like my range of anger that it's like I almost
Mm.
can't grasp it. It's so big. Maybe, and I don't
Mm.
know if that is a
It
part of
would
it
be
or
like when people describe like psychopaths, a
mm,
person who's so like devoid of any kind of feeling. So yeah, and it's where we get to a place of I would say high level control. So here I'm going to just be controversial as usual, but people, at a global scale of governance. So when you've got, the people in the like Hawaii, and who's the other of the World Economic Forum, the what is that fellow's name? But basically, it's really just absolute mechanization of everything. Here is the control. So when it's at an individual level, if a person has gone, really lost that themselves and they're just deeply cold, everything then is very mechanistic. There's very little feeling behind it. It's highly calculated and
mm,
planned. Like that's how I would, it's robotic
yeah.
to that point. And that's, very extreme. But yeah, yeah,
Maybe I've never
that's
touched that then because I'm like I
no,
don't
that's a good
know.
thing.
Yeah. I don't know how to like not feel because like even when I say I feel like I sometimes shut it off, I still feel the anger beneath it.
Yeah,
It's just a different, it's not like an overwhelming, like I think with the other one for me it's like it's chasing the pain, chasing the high, chasing the this, chasing the that. It's that instant gratification. Whereas the other
yeah,
one is this like calm, cool, calculated, but I feel the thing growing inside. Right. And
yeah,
so I'm still feeling something, I guess. So
yeah,
like for people, I guess that don't, and I know everybody experiences emotions differently, but like
yeah,
some people I watch and I'm like, how do you, and maybe they're feeling and they just don't express it. But sometimes I'm like, I don't know. And this is like with human design and astrology that I think is interesting. If you like,
mm,
if you look at the solar plexus, I,
mm,
I dated someone a while ago that has a completely undefined or open solar plexus. So they have no energetic like connection to that aspect of themselves.
mm,
And only like once in like 2.5 years did I see them like slightly emotional. Everything else was always like really, it felt cold to me, which is very like,
mm,
and I
mm.
would be like, I don't know how to like even engage with that world because it's just very
Yeah,
different from what I'm used to. And I'm not saying that, my emotions, because I was so dramatically emotional to the opposite side of shadow, right?
yeah,
Whereas like it just ran everything, it took over everything. It just created so much chaos because I couldn't separate myself from the emotion. And I feel
yeah,
like that's been a huge lesson for me over the last 2 years is being able to sit and be like, okay, like taking the story out of the emotion and separating them and being like, I can
yeah,
feel this, but it doesn't have to mean this. And I don't have to do this or say
yeah,
this or act this, right? I can just be with it.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
was super challenging, but it's helped me so much.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's the only like the way you work with it.
Mm,
It gets to that part, and I think we can, so there's like, again, even with going into our shadow and healing, there is the intellectualization. Lots of people can intellectualize their experiences and understand it very intellectually. That isn't at all really addressing anything that is actually
Mm.
stored in our body, in our energy field. And when then you start to go into your actual body and healing it, you're then processing all of those that emotion, but you're able to then start to like dissect it, just as what you described, and be able to go, okay, so this came from this event. This is the belief. This is the story that I made up about it. This is the sort of coping mechanisms I developed to, either continue enforcing that story or as a means to cover up, as a means to push down that story. And you're starting to separate it all and understand all its moving pieces, whilst at the same time recognizing that you're doing the observing of all of that. And so there is that separation from, hang on, this isn't me per se. And yeah, it can become very then like healing and empowering, and sort of you start to get more, uh I want to say control, but it's really like knowledge and wisdom, I would say, about yourself, and you're able to come more into your authenticity, your own deeper truth, and get to discover what that actually is, and then begin to get very creative in, and again, self-defining in, you know, how what you're going to develop to sort of replace that, or again initiate yourself through what is now old or what has never fit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For people that like where it's so repressed to the point that like I think that's it comes from a coping mechanism, this sort of in childhood, or and I think I don't know, my question, I'm trying to dig for my question here because I have it's like people that have it so repressed that maybe it appears to be Aramaic, where they're not feeling, they're really cold, calculated. Like I think, and it is like if you look at their life, they have had traumatic childhoods or things that clearly have caused that sort of behavior. I guess like the dismissive avoidant, where they've had to take care of themselves, they've had to be selfish, they've had to do it, and then I mean, because I've asked people who appear maybe like that to me, and I'm like, how do you feel frustration? And they're like, I don't know, I just think I'm frustrated. Like there's no like feel as it's been described. Like I said, I have a really hard time even understanding that. But I guess like how do you eventually, like I feel like if they even let themselves feel, it would be
Mm.
so big and overwhelming.
Mm.
Like I don't know. There's a question here, and I am very poorly wording this,
No,
but
no, no. I get what you're speaking to. And I also don't know what that is.
mm-hmm.
Like I have that same level of curiosity as what you do. Like, wow, I'm so interested. What is that like for
Yeah.
you? I mean, so I don't know that I could really share what that's about. It's more observing. So
Mm-hmm.
there are people that I know that actually are very emotional and very emotionally connected to their feelings, lots of empathy, lots of compassion, can get angry, can have explosions, can have grief or frustration. But then there are some things that I know that they've experienced, and like there is this deep guilt or there is this deep shame, and that is corralled off. And so that's like what they don't let themselves sort of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that would come out in, I would potentially describe it as that dismissive avoidant, because when that shame or that guilt can get activated, then it's like not cold and
Mm-hmm.
just like devoid, and can get really locked into a particular kind of like state of consciousness. So if I was to describe that energetically or psychically, yeah, that person is like they have locked themselves off into basically an isolation so that they don't feel what has been triggered and what is coming up. They are very hard to reach. It's like that there's, for an X amount of period of time that they are locked into that place. It's like they're unreachable in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're communicating to them, there is this sense of distance, I suppose. Um, but no, I'm with you. I operate like you, so it's like I can't imagine it. It feels
Mm-hmm.
very foreign.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. It's hard to even like relate, I feel like, when like if you're in a partnership with somebody like that or in a relationship with someone like that. It's like, how do you even, I don't know. There's no way you could understand each other almost.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I suppose when something gets very triggered like that, the other person needs time to defrost. That's that anxious and
Mm-hmm.
avoidant kind of
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. And
Mm-hmm.
because when that, dismissive, avoidant or avoidant is that deeply triggered, they go cold, they need to go offline. There's this, I guess, mechanistic. I'm just now throw myself into work, go through the
Mm-hmm.
motions, remove myself from being able to feel anything, um, and not willing to place themselves in positions where that might be triggered. Again, it's like, nah. And the anxious is very, wanting that connection, wanting that engagement, wanting to understand, wanting to feel seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one time this person that he dismissive and I'm more anxious in that dynamic, the one time that they were emotional, they like stepped out of the room. And in hindsight, I feel like I horribly handled the situation, but like I like burst in there and I was like, you don't have to be here if you don't want to. Cause I wanted the connection. Like you said, I wanted him to share with me. And I realized in hindsight in that moment, I made him feel completely unsafe to even like be in the space with me and be emotional. But it's just yeah, it's I growth and learning, and
That's
things like that.
right.
But
That's right. Yeah.
being able to be like, wow, that was maybe not the best move to have made in that
Yeah.
moment. But
Yeah.
this is also why alcohol and emotions, just for me, I had to take a step back from that and assess like when I'm drinking and why I'm drinking, because it heightens all those things. And I think like I was listening to a podcast. I think it might have been, oh no, it was the audiobook, but he was talking about addiction. And he was
Mhm.
saying that he was like a rabbi, but he was saying that, you know, addiction in itself a little bit allows us to sort of like peek into that connection, right? the,
Mhm.
the drugs, the alcohol, it sort of like gives us a glimpse as to
Mhm.
like what's possible. And he was
Mhm.
saying that a lot of people who are addicts, it's because they are so sensitive and so
Mhm.
potentially able to connect so deeply that they're like constantly chasing that, because the everyday life, like the mundane, the like, surface level things, is really hard for a space to be in. And
Mhm.
I was like, whoa, that's so true, because there's so many people, people that I know that are former addicts or struggle with alcohol and things like that. And once you get into these conversations, like there's so much depth and they're so curious and they really want to go there and they really want to understand themselves in the world. But I think that it's like then you come back to life of like struggles with money and struggles with parenting and struggles with all these things. And it's like harder to maybe like adapt the soul into those things. And I was thinking
Mhm.
like Pisces with that, right? Because I think that's Pisces struggle, is Pisces is very spiritual, but it's having to be in this
Mhm.
3D. And it's like that disconnect, I guess, between the soul and the body, maybe. And so
Mhm.
it's a really interesting, it was an interesting point. And I think about, my years of, I mean, I guess in hindsight, I would say addiction. I would probably classify my alcohol use as more of an addiction, because I was detaching, I was disassociating, I was just trying to like numb myself to not feel so much. But at the
Mhm.
time, especially in like my early 20s, I feel like it served me in the sense of, um, I don't know, I guess that like it made me feel like I connected with people deeper, but it was not really deeper, right? At the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? Like the
Yeah.
next day I would kind of go back to my normal life and I'd be like, oh, that was cool. And then maybe I'd feel awkward. And like now I feel
Mhm.
like now I'm when I'm more showing up as myself, being my
Mhm.
authentic self in public and not being like, oh, I can't talk about spirituality, I can't talk about human design, I can't talk about astrology. Like now that I show up and somebody says something, I'm like, oh, do you know your birth time was like, check it out. Now I'm able to
Mhm.
more deeply have what I was craving without the
Yeah.
alcohol. Right. But I
Yeah.
think that you don't, there are so many like, you can't be like this, you can't be like that. All your conditioning and trauma and things like that make you feel like you have to be a certain way. And it's like
Yeah.
reaching for something outside of that. So, I mean, there are still days where I'm like, I would just love to drink a bottle of wine and just like, you know what I mean? Like forget it all. But I'm like, okay, there
Yeah.
are,
Oh, I
and
get it.
it's the balance now. But I don't know. I just think that addiction is really interesting because it is super shadowy. But I think that I'm not promoting it in any way, but I'm just saying there's a reason
No,
why we
it's an
do
altered
it.
state.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an altered state of consciousness. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in that altered state, you are now able to sense and feel more of yourself, sense and feel more of others, and then again, it depends on the person and the dynamic. Um, but yeah, it's like it's allowing you into something that you don't feel you can enter into ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
um, from that more like sober or state, or as you say, then even the material world, yeah, that can be definitely tricky at times. And I think, these are why spirituality is so important. But it's not just the intellectualizing of spirituality, it is the active kind of curiosity in it, in that being in the material plane is incredibly spiritual. We can use our spiritual forces. We can acknowledge spirit in literally everything. And it's actually our materialized thinking. So, again, very mechanistic, very intellectual, or very like separate from God. Here is just the anatomy. Here is just the physics. Here is the structure. Here is the rules. Here is that is all sort of devoid of spirit in that regard. And so we have to, you know, consciously start to work with ourselves to notice and sense and feel the spirit of ourselves, or the spirit and energy of our life, the spirit of the people that we interact with, and what is what are we infusing in what we're doing? What are we doing in our household? Why are we doing the routines or making the choices that we're doing? It's becoming more active in, basically it's deconditioning our sort of very devoid, materialized, dry relationship with the world, and starting to spiritualize it again. And that does not happen in the head. And a lot of people can have a lot of spiritual or esoteric knowledge and yet be still incredibly material and very disconnected. They can just relay it out and not actually have the experience of it. And like all of what you've described in working with your own shadow, it takes the same kind of effort or work to then, when you're going around and things are feeling devoid of, are feeling heavy, or you are in that dark night of the soul, and the shadow is coming up, it is actively also going, this is like literally for me, or there is this spiritual essence within that, or I'm going to draw from my surroundings in a way that can support my pain, or support my grief, or support my healing right now. But we've got to work for that. A person can be sitting outside on the grass on their own and, feeling incredibly isolated. And another person can be sitting out and having equally a hard time, but actually start to allow support in, and that support being just the environment that's around them, and starting to interact in a different way. And that's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. But yeah, addiction is an altered state,
Yeah.
and addiction is there to cope with, the environment that person is in. I would say a lot of spiritual people, or people who are highly sensitive or perceptive, they are most inclined to have addictive behaviors. One is because that they are seeking to feel that sense of union again with the, unseen realm, or, what's there behind the veil, both in shadow and light. And it's also to, yeah, often cope and escape with what has been in their world or is in their world.
Hmm.
Sure.
Yeah. Is there like maybe like an energetic difference? I mean, I know like there's a difference in like the way it makes you feel between like alcohol and like drugs, because I don't know why I always feel like, and maybe just because like alcohol is so like normalized in our
Mm,
society that it feels different. Like I know they're all altered states, but for some reason like drugs, it feels
mm,
a little bit more, for me I feel a little bit more out of control, maybe because I don't do it
mm.
every single day, but like there's like a there, I guess there's almost a sense of like I know what I'm going to feel like when I drink, as opposed to like doing certain drugs.
Un
Yeah.
Unknown. Yeah. They do all different
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
Um, Alcohol for the most part, actually, it's again so unique to each person, and I would say super unique to where an individual is at
Mm.
in a point in time. So it actually dims perception. It can bring about inhibition. You start to get a little more loose, a little more expressive, um, and it can then bring up what has been sitting under the surface potentially, or you'll do the opposite and you'll just go into that like pleasure. But it's more in terms of psychically, it's actually a dimming of awareness, whereas then different types of drugs, gosh, we're going to break it down. They do different things.
Yeah.
Like they stimulate or in, interact with your consciousness in different kinds of ways,
Hmm. Yeah,
and
I
get
guess.
stored held in the body in different ways too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say maybe a better like way to ask that question is like, is there certain like shadow that's drawn to like certain drugs, or
Oh, like shadow as in our
like maybe like
pain.
I feel so like alcohol, right? I feel like people tend to get more angry when they're on alcohol,
Oh,
right? It sort of like triggers maybe the anger shadow, as
mm,
opposed to maybe, I mean, I don't know, like psilocybin, right? Like mushrooms tend to, yeah, like I don't know if that's if that question makes sense, but like
no, it makes sense. Like again, personally, I'm just like, I don't like these are things that I would want to study. I don't know that I could sort of bring any information. It would be I'd feel like I'm generalizing, or I'd be saying
yeah,
something that would be correct. Because I could say alcohol for some people makes them highly emotional,
yeah,
but that all of this would be reflective. That's right. All of
yeah.
this would be reflective of, that person's own, you know, sort of ecosystem,
Mhm.
really. And I would say the same for drugs. Yeah, you could say there are particular types of drugs, um, that have certain effects. That has been, sort of, you could say methamphetamines, they can get over a long period of time very angry or very like violent, aggressive. It can lead to there, but also very like paranoid. You now sort of you're essentially breaking your energetic field through, drugs or alcohol if done in excess and reflective of that individual's own unique energetic structure. So there are some people that have such like a strong constitution, you could say, even energetically, that they can potentially handle a lot more of particular substances than a person who has a sort of more fine or refined um, field. But yeah, either way, you're ending up with some kind of, yeah, fractured consciousness
Mhm.
ultimately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed at the end of like when I was drinking more heavily, and I don't know if it's maybe simultaneously because I'm doing the work of like trying to connect more deeply. And but I would just notice like I felt like when I was drinking alcohol, it would like put like my skin would like tingle, and I just felt like it was like this, it was like wrapping me into something that I couldn't feel outside of that. It was almost
Yeah.
like ballooning my own energy within myself, and I couldn't
Yeah.
like connect with anything outside of that. And I like
Yeah.
continued to feel that, and it just felt like it started to feel uncomfortable, whereas like I'm not sensing other people. I'm not, and I'm so used to, in my
Mm.
sober state or like walking around, like I'm used to sensing people. So it's like when you're in
Yeah.
that like cocoon almost, it was just an odd feeling. And I only really noticed it, at the end. And I'm sure that was just part of, and I do drink every now and again, but now it's like, why am I drinking? Like I'm really
Mm.
intentional, I think, sort of like any drug, like that set and setting. It's like, if I'm going out on a date and we're having, wine, like I generally feel fine, right? But if I'm
Yeah.
emotional and then I'm having a glass of wine, or I can feel in my body when my body's like, not tonight. And if I go against that, I usually don't feel, even, it could be one glass of wine and I'll still
Yes.
not feel great the next morning. So
Yeah.
it's like really tuning into that. And it
Yes.
just started to feel like every single morning I would wake up after and I just felt awful. I was like, this is not worth it. I don't like coming to work. And then I would get anxious.
Yeah.
But it's just like that to me was really interesting. That sort of like energetic feeling. It was like the
Mm.
second skin that I could just feel was like trapping me, I guess. And that
Yep.
was more uncomfortable. It was like, I want to be able to feel outside of this, even though my
Yeah.
emotions are so big. And sometimes like I
Yeah.
don't know how to discern what's mine and what's not. I still
Yeah.
want to be able to feel it because that's
Yeah.
just, I guess, a part of me.
Yeah. You were talking about the desensitization of your etheric field there.
Mm.
So that tingling, and so now there's this sort of buffer
Mm-hmm.
between, like, the etheric field is what translates the information coming from the astral. So when you're sensing another person, that's actually coming through your astral body into your etheric body and communicating information to you. Or when you are aware of yourself, aware of your thoughts, aware of your own feelings, sensations, again, that's coming from your own astral field through your etheric. And alcohol and drugs, again, like, I'm sure there probably were times, like you say, it actually heightened you, and now you can feel way more of your own emotions. Like,
Mm-hmm.
here is big that it's now spilling over, kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. But yeah, when it brings that kind of numbing, tingly, captured energy, yeah, it's the desensitization of your etheric field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's in a, like, sort of this like delay process. It's where people, when they are drinking, they have delayed responses to things, and drugs, it's delayed responses to things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But again, on drugs too, it can be the total opposite of that. It can be then almost like hyperreactivity, like really a very, yeah, like reactive, out of control state. So everything is like a complete bombardment of things,
Mm-hmm.
senses, thoughts, feelings, but also what they may be, connecting to in that astral realm, which,
Mm-hmm.
people can say that they're speaking, they're having like a sort of delusional experience. They're speaking of feeling as though something is watching them, or feeling as though that there's some sort of things around them, unseen things around them, or getting those kind of creepy feelings. Yeah, that's reflective of them, where their consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is now permeable to, because they are under the influence, but it's at a lower astral plane level where they are aware of what is around them, in a sense. But on a very material plane, we're kind of going, that's not actually true, that's happening, you're delusional. Yeah, when don't, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like kind of, is it like I guess like meeting us energetically, like if we're looking from the lens of like shadow, right? If I'm drinking or if I'm doing drugs, like it's bringing those things up. But like, and I guess like even like defining like what drug is, right? Because it's like microdosing like mushrooms. I've done that for a couple years off and on, and I never really feel the effects of it. It's just sort of working in the background, and I've noticed
Yeah.
my anxiety reducing. I haven't done a
Mm.
full on trip though, right? Or like, intentional ayahuasca, maybe like ceremonies that's very intentional, and maybe it's like, so it's like, I don't, I guess it is that intention, behind why we're doing it, or
For
I don't know. It's
sure.
just an interesting.
For sure. For sure. The intention and then also the ownership of what you're working with.
Hmm.
So you can go in and have this intention and be very intentional, be very thoughtful, go into a level of preparation around it. And yet our beingness knows what it is that we're actually first needing to look at or address. So if we've got this intention of, again, if I just make it very sort of standard and generalized, but I want to know my soul's purpose or what I'm here to do. What might actually come up is everything that is in like barrier or blockage that is preventing you from having that clear connection and stream and sense to it. So you might be very intentional and go, I'm going to go into some kind of ceremony with this, and then not have the experience of, oh, I was shown my life purpose or my soul's purpose, but instead you were shown the many layers of your own shadow, and we can go, that was bad, or why did that happen? And that sort of trip experience was um potentially really also traumatic. I would possibly definitely throw that in there, especially if a person was not prepared at all to be able to work with their own shadow. So it could also be very traumatic and then therefore unsafe in that regard. But yeah, like definitely intention, but intention isn't a means to control what it is that is needing to be revealed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
And I guess like sometimes when I've done anything, not not alcohol, but like maybe mushrooms, or,
mhm,
when I was younger, did like oh my gosh, MDMA or things like that, right? Where I think it was that fear of the unknown, right? Like
mm,
what is going to come up, right? Because we
mm,
like knowing that they're shadows, or I guess like, and I think like holding that fear, like when I did ecstasy I was like 18 or 19, but I remember like
mm,
I was so afraid of like what I was going to feel or how it was going to happen or what was going to, and we went to a rave, which is, I think is why, when you're younger, you hear people like with mushrooms who've had really bad trips. And I think it's maybe because exactly that, like they just weren't in a state to experience what was coming up with that, especially when you're
mm,
in like these overstimulating environments. Um,
sure.
but yeah, I just remember this like extreme fear. And then as soon as it hit, like, I mean, like I threw up everywhere. I was like crying. And then after like all that passed, it was almost like I purged all that fear. And then I had a great time. But it was like, it was just like trapped and stuck. And it was just this fear
Yeah.
of the unknown. Right. And it's like you have to like move through that. And it's, yeah, like you said, like not controlling. I think it was just, I wanted to control what was going to happen. I wanted to know what
Yeah.
was going to happen and know how I was going to feel and what it was going to look like. And
Yeah.
you just don't know with drugs. Right. And I think
Mm,
that can be part of that like
for
unease,
sure.
I guess, with taking them.
I think that's the case with, really coming to the point of choosing to live authentically or live from your soul and your spirit. It's the same thing when that is starting to call an individual and they're starting to increasingly feel like, there is that inside truth and their inside expression, and they're noticing more and more and more that everything in their external world is not that. Like their friends, their lifestyle, their work, it's like, I don't even, none of this is actually the truth of me. So there's this very big distinction. There's always again that unknown or that choice point. What is out external, what is created that is safe, and you can justify it, but I love these friends, or I love, these elements, even though at the same time when you're in connection and when you're doing those activities, you're sort of actually going, this is not right for me anymore, and you keep feeling that great discomfort. It's again the unknown of being able to go, okay, am I going to trust in, and what is that going to mean, and what's going to unfold when you start to follow that inner guidance. And any person who steps on to I used to call it the soul train, you board the soul train, you are saying yes to your shadow being revealed. People are often very shocked. I thought it was going to be like this, or, I've said, I know that I'm following my truth, or I know that this is the right direction I'm meant to be going toward, but at the same time, why is this so hard? Why are these challenges happening? Why is all this pain coming up when we have been taught that, following our heart or our soul or, is again kind of a rosy experience. And it's not. It's just the truth. It's very much both. And if you do not want to see yourself or come to know yourself deeply, um, don't bother following, don't bother listening to the soul. Just continue with whatever you're doing realistically.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, because it is a big unknown experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we go to like maybe even like a higher level of shadow? Because it's like if shadow is, repressed parts of ourselves or repressed emotions and things like that, and from a higher lens where we're in the society where I think we're conditioned to believe a lot of things, we're conditioned to think certain things are wrong or bad, or we have to act this way or that way, then it's like there's obviously a higher agenda to like how we're supposed to behave and act. So it's like if we're repressing parts of ourselves that actually, and then finding that authenticity and facing those shadows, which I feel like a majority of the shadows that we face aren't really anything like bad, right? It's just parts of us that maybe aren't accepted by society. So it's the rejected, the unloved, the things like that. And then we're trying to like embrace those parts of us, but then we're seen from the outside as, selfish, ungrateful, or whatever, just because we're accepting these things that are not societally accepted. Then it's like, that higher whatever it is, that it's like, I don't know, it's like Pink Floyd The Wall, right? We're just supposed to act in accordance in a certain way. So it's like, I don't know. I guess it gets, I don't know. I can like follow those conspiracy theories or like, it's just interesting to me that there's such like a high agenda that we have no idea what it is, right? I mean,
Mm.
does this
You
make
mean
sense?
like manipulation of consciousness? Oh yeah, my
Yes.
brain
Yeah.
goes
Yeah.
all sorts
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
directions here.
Yeah. So it's like
Well,
we're holding these shadows of things that really maybe aren't even shadows. It's just parts that we're not, that someone somewhere has, yeah, an agenda of like, we're supposed to act a certain way to fall in line.
yeah, so I would probably best way, oh, there's so many different ways to describe it. And it starts to go back into our history and the history of like development of consciousness, human evolution of human consciousness and the evolution of Earth. So it's stuff that we are processing as a collective now are things that had, that occurred in earlier periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we could look at the suppression of the feminine or the dark feminine. We can say we've got, the masculine elements of that. But yeah, it it's all of the beliefs and the what was appropriate consciousness for earlier periods of time, the way of relating to the world, like some of that in previous traumas, like we've got so many layers of um unconscious or unprocessed streams of energy that we're working through. And again, the best way probably to understand it is you, I'm 42. I can look back over the course of my life, and we can go through the 7-year cycles, the 7-year cycles mirrored, or when we look at, that sort of onion analogy, and we can notice, oh, I'm working through that theme again. It's that theme again. And we can know that, wow, many times over the course of our life, it's coming up. Here we're peeling back that onion layer. We're continuing to work through that. That's the same with humanity. So there are things that have occurred in our near and distant past, going back a very long time, right to like Lemuria, Atlantis, the post-Atlantean epochs, so periods of India and Egypt and Persia, the Greco-Roman, and all of these things have different states of consciousness where we rose and fell. So when we're rising, and then anything when we fall, there is always excess. There is always where things go into, darkness or go into degradation. And so that there are beliefs or there are habits, or rituals, processes that when we go into excess with anything, it starts to get pretty dysfunctional and dark, which is a normal process, just as even if you described when dabbling, playing, this is fun, to okay, this is normal, to this is not right, this is uncomfortable, now this is very uncomfortable, and perhaps a few little extreme experiences when you lost control, whatever that may have looked like for you and me. I'm not outside of that. I think most people, wherever it is that you experience that in your life, um, that's a normal process, right? So we've done that as well to get to where we are now, which is the fifth cultural epoch of post-Atlantis. So we've got a lot of history behind us, a lot of history. And, you know, I have like more perhaps an esoteric foundational understanding of the planets where we would probably meet and match but have different perspectives. But the moon is hugely connected again to our subconscious and unconscious. And the moon has been a part of Earth, and the moon is part of all of our own psyches. So you've got those elements. Now you've got to understand that man is a hierarchy on the kingdom of Earth. We have got three kingdoms below us, but then we have kingdoms above us. And so we're sort of in this middle realm, and where you say we're belonging then to two worlds. So just as we can structure the earth, from say mineral, plant, animal, then there are the higher hierarchies of the heavenly world. And not again, if I use the term even Lucifer, I'm not coming from a biblical religious dogmatic religion perspective here, but the fall of Lucifer, this has catalyzed our development of consciousness, but at the same time, it's with all of the darkness, all of the dark beings, the Luciferic beings that have come with that, and that is real. And here it's where I can bring up, we can notice how materialized our consciousness is. It is the material plane that's hard. Isn't that a concept? Isn't that just an archetype? That's just a religious term? That's just a story. I know it's not. And um, it's interesting even for me to say that so clearly now, whilst also wanting to be very respectful of where people are at. Because we all take our own journeys to being able to really decondition our mind and start to understand that we are living within a much greater reality, and we are interacting with that at all times. So people like spooky stories. They don't want to have spooky experiences, but everyone's generally like, oh, all right, tell me a spooky story. Tell me of some shadow. Tell me of some darkness. Have you seen any scary things? And I think most people through the course of their life have gone into places and just, oh, I feel the heebie-jeebies there. Something was really off there. And they know it wasn't, it's of a spiritual nature, even if at the same time they don't believe in any of that stuff at all. And they'll tell you that I don't believe in any of that stuff, but something that was also creepy, and they can't quite reconcile it. But again, what you're talking about now is then the higher heavens, or that heavenly realm. So you've also got those Aramanic, which is that descending, materializing. It wants to draw us down into the material plane. It wants to have us disconnected from our spirit. Whereas Lucifer wants us so high out of our bodies, so caught up in bloody sex magic and, drugs into altered states and, extremism and appearances. It's that. So you want to then bring in, say, MK Ultra or manipulation, and what it is doing is really often in two senses of the the sort of perspective. Firstly, it's going to utilize like Luciferic energies in terms of chaos. So it's going to create chaotic, global chaotic situations. It's going to really stimulate a person into heightened feeling, emotion, reactivity, like very discombobulating, very yeah, just disorientating. There, I cannot find my orientation at all. And this is allowing a person then to sort of be in a very vulnerable position that then there is control inserted. And that will often be of some kind of harmonic nature. So here is the control, here is the systems. Hand over your power, and we will tell you what to do. And then you're starting to become a little bit more roboticized in that way. And you can like you have to look at the pretty much most industries, but music industry, um, or when there's big events, they're global satanic rituals. And so it's done with here is this, you know, famous person, singer, it's in movies. Like there is so much predictive programming, or there anytime you're entering into witnessing or watching something that is classified as sort of entertainment, there's been all this grooming of the mind and you're moving into an altered state. So when you are watching an event and there is this performance and it is a song, the song itself connects into a particular, starts to attune you and train you into a certain kind of vibrational or energetic state. And then there is a performative element of ritual that will be going on, and you are drawing in like mass levels of consciousness, people's energies, people's sort of you are entraining them and entrancing them. There is this like enchantment or entrancement that is occurring. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Social media or just apps. And again, here is that harmonic. We can now barely use our own will to be able to have a level of self-control. We are trying to escape our lives or are so unpresent. We're chasing that, like the dopamine hit. So everything that we're talking about also has a like anatomical or physiological response to our body. And it's one of the things increasingly I'm fascinated in, just more stuff I'll probably never get to do because I would need lots of money to be able to research and have a whole heap of scientists that want to be on board with me. But there is massive amounts of correlation between the stimulation, like I see it in the readings I do. When we have stuff in our energy field, it influences the chemical biology and hormone biology, like processes in our body, which then influences the health of our body, the way our anatomy functions or the way our brain functions. And going back to at a global level, yeah, you are in this way kind of directing a group of like, directing people who perhaps aren't aware or haven't had the opportunity based on their own personal resources or means or the safety of their own environment for lots of different reasons, um, into a devoidism. It's a devoidism. It's a addiction to like feeling good, reducing our ability to be able to focus, our ability to be able to use our mind. Everything is increasingly becoming automated. And in that, there is this state of no longer knowing who it is that we are, feeling this sort of like it's a significant degradation. And this is because of the more spiritual influences. So we think of it being, a baddie humans at the top, which it is, but it's also because they are also heavily influenced by the unseen hierarchies of different beings, different energies, different states of consciousness. And the last thing I would say there is whoever these people are at the top, they are like recapitulations of people who are coming back into reincarnation reflective of, Atlantean periods of time. So their karma and what they are, you know, sort of battling with within themselves or living out has got a lot to do with other pretty significant change of consciousness time. So we're right on the cusp in some ways. They'll say Age of Aquarius. I think that's a couple more thousands of years away when we fully go over, but we're definitely, and I know that's astrology says something different. I'm open to all of it. I'm not like hard, this is it, but we are in a change of times, a transitionary season. So this is where the veils are also thinner, but where consciousness itself can be, most influenced and directed, and where we're going to see quite significant and extraordinary changes for both good and kind of bad, I suppose, or degradation. Reflective of how susceptible we are to the pressures that we're coming up against. And all of this is each for our own individual, so our own personal evolution as well. So we can go, oh my God, well, why? And this is bad. And I hate these people. You wouldn't be born in this time if you weren't for this time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's really about, I would say, then education. Again, why I feel so passionate about wanting to get people to like spirituality is shadow.
Mm.
It might be more and more popular, but it's still relegated. People aren't taking it seriously. Nobody actually really wants to deeply recognize this is what the reality of what I'm actually in and living in. And that's someone who might be intrigued. It's also, I just call it sometimes spiritual cocaine, getting high for some people, because when you really start to actually understand the structure or the nature of the reality of what we're in, it's actually incredibly empowering, and you can start to go, right, this is what's going on in this period of time. And it's not just the baddies at the top, the sort of deep state, and it goes beyond that, but it goes beyond that, not so that your persecutor is happening to you. You can start to put it in a much bigger developmental scheme of what's occurring.
Mm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think spirituality is definitely a lot harder than people think in the beginning. I think it's like, oh, I'll meditate for a little while and I'll just like see God or something, but it is, like you said, there is
It's a
so
science.
much shadow to it. Like it would be so
Yeah,
easy to just go back to whatever, but sort of like, yeah, when you see it, and I know that there's so much that I still don't even see. And even like the things that I do, like I feel like I'm more aware of, even that can like really fuck with your mind sometimes, where I'm like, what is actually happening right now? Like, I don't know.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. And even when it comes to mental health or just caring for, like I thought that I was schizophrenic. I I had a massive experience when I was, so my I would have always had psychic experiences. They started to really heighten again through the natural kind of ebb and flow cycles through my teens, but very much from probably when I was 11. Um, I grew up in a relatively religious household. Um, and so having these more psychic experiences was confronting, at least to my stepmom, or concerning. I was involved in youth group and, go to church, and yeah, was having these experiences as well. So, that's got all that kind of demonization attached to it. Um, and needing to try and work that out for myself. But I would have been 21 and was having again another sort of psychic expansion, you could maybe call it, a period of heightened awareness or activity. And I went to the shopping center, and just every person I went past, it was like downloading a movie of their story and all their energy and their emotion. And I came out and I just cried. Am I going crazy? I'm worried I'm sort of like some sort of like what's happening? Am I having a psychotic break of some kind? No, I'm just very intuitive, very psychic. So I think that there's lots of people that are very heightened, very intuitive, and that go through periods of time of greater awareness that haven't had any education. Sort of mainstream healthcare systems don't have any knowledge of any of this, and they're pathologized and they're put on medication, or they're made to feel like they're crazy, or they're taught that these experiences that they're having aren't actually real, when they are. And that's, I think, very damaging, very disempowering, and can really set a person up for, again, depending on their own individual nature, a lot of difficulty or challenge that was unnecessary if that was supported. Um, and then, yeah, just how we care for people in general with different types of mental health. Again, the mainstream system does not include or recognize potential shadow influences that, and every person has it. Every person, you don't want to talk about entities, but it's like, oh, I haven't had that, or like every person has. It's normal. It's a part of our own process and evolution. When you start to go down into certain qualities of thoughts, when you're going into a dark night of the soul, or your own shadow is coming up, there are even just low-lying entities that can be housed and homed in your own field because of the environment quality of energy that you've got going on. But a person who has experienced potentially very traumatic events has then gone into sort of some kind of coping mechanism of drugs or alcohol and taken that to a place, potentially also hanging out with people or going to environments of great exposure when they're in a very uh a vulnerable state, let's say, they are vulnerable in their own sort of mental and emotional well-being, and then under the influence, and then in an environment where you've got, lots of different things potentially going on. Yeah, you can pick up things that then influence your well-being. Um, that again, it's not something that I think we're failing. I think we're failing a lot. And for people who really suffer with mental health and are hospitalized, and I'm not saying this is the case for all of them, but the fact that we do not include very much any longer. So you think back using a religious paradigm, there was the awareness of demonic possession or entity influence. This was normal. There was a lot of education and training, and there was this understanding of these higher realms and worlds, and that was processes. Not to say that that didn't go into excess and wonky places, okay, but we don't even include that in our paradigm of awareness at all anymore.
Mhm.
And I think that's silly,
Yeah.
very silly, foolish, and again, harmful for
Mhm.
that individual who is suffering in a particular way. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
a it's an interesting world we live in.
It is. And I mean, with the mental health, and I'm not going to get too deep into the story because it's not like mine to tell, but
Mm.
my daughter has been going through, group therapy and things like that. And it's very much, this is your diagnosis, this is your label now, right? And then, well, we have to do this, we have to do that. And it's this, and they push the medications.
Mhm.
And she, had a hard time sleeping. So they're like, well, we need to put her on this. And I'm like, no, we're going to try probiotics and magnesium first and going for walks, right? Like that,
Mhm.
because that's just for me very grounding. And I'm been open to trying alternatives, but I want to try holistic remedies first. Or
Try.
she's always, through astrology, I've always seen her chart. I've always known she has massive like spiritual potential. I mean, we all have massive spiritual potential, but it's very much in her chart, the depth and sensitivities that she has. I've known that like since I've seen her
Mhm.
chart. But she's always seen spirits, shadows, whatever you want to call it, ever since she was like 6 months old. She would wave at things, she talked to things, she would bring food into the closet for boys that were there that nobody could see, like she's always like, and I've never
Mhm.
once been like, that's weird, stop doing that. I've just been like, oh, what do you see? Or like, even if it freaked
Mhm.
me out, I wouldn't let her know,
Yeah.
It'd just be like,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on there?
Yeah.
And then in the house that we're currently in, she sees these shadows, and I asked her to describe them. She's like, they're really, really tall, and I'm like, are you scared? She's like, no, they just kind of like stand there and then they go away.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
she went into one of these sessions and described a shadow that she had seen. And then I got the phone call that they wanted to start on antipsychotic medication, right? It's that
Mhm.
automatic trigger of like, well, you have like something seriously wrong with you. And
Mhm.
I resisted that. And I think being a parent in this system with, maybe a little bit more awareness and
Mhm.
acceptance of the spiritual side of things, to look at a doctor and say no is so hard, right? Because you
So
have all of
hard.
those things of like, well, but they're a
So
doctor, they
hard.
maybe they do know better than me, and if I don't
Yeah.
put her on this medication, is that going to make her, there's so much that goes into that. But I just have to like tap in and trust myself and have those honest conversations with her about like what she wants to do. But I'm like,
Mhm.
just because in my eyes she sees, and then we got a different doctor and I spoke to her and I was like, listen, I'm very, I'm spiritual, and I think that that's what's going on. And she's like, oh, I'm spiritual too. And I completely, and so it was a breath of fresh air to actually have somebody in the medical system that we were able to connect with. That's like, she doesn't need to be on that, she's good,
Yeah.
but that I think was, maybe energetically we attracted that or something, but I don't think that's super common. And like you said, there's this element that I think is missing in a lot of healthcare,
Huge.
this
Huge.
yeah, the spiritual side of things, that why can't we be seeing ghosts, like, like why does that have to be medicated? Why do we have to be in like inpatient facilities? Because we've had these experiences that people don't understand. And yeah, I think that we're not supported within that system. And I think just being like, when she first came home and said, well, they diagnosed me with this, I
Mhm.
said over and over, I said, you're experiencing that right now, it's not who you
Mhm.
are. And I want to
Mhm.
be very clear about that. It's okay to
Yeah.
feel depression or sadness or whatever, but
Yeah.
that's not who you are. Don't define
That's
yourself
right.
by that.
That's
So it's
right.
very easy to be like, well, I'm this, the doctor said that, and then a whole lifetime of medication instead of
Terrible.
doing the
Yeah.
work. And I
Yeah.
think it is heartbreaking that there's so many children. And I think, not to say that, we, not to say that children like that haven't come through in, older generations, but I think there's a lot more of them coming through now. And
Mhm.
maybe that's why, a lot more people are seemingly on the spiritual path, or it's becoming something that's more talked about. Or maybe I'm just, that's sort of like my reality and I'm seeing more of that. I
Mhm.
don't know. But
Mhm.
it just, yeah, it's such a disservice to just the human being that we're
It
not,
is.
you know, I don't know. And I don't know what that distinction between people who really need to be in there. Like, have
Mhm.
you seen the Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have.
And that one, I
Yeah.
was so, I don't even know. I watched that like 3 times in the theater because I just felt like I could have
Mhm.
muted that show, the whole movie. I could have muted it and just been like equally as drawn in. But it's like that
Mhm.
progression of that, the whole mental health system, right? In there, where it's like he was on like 15 different pills, and then you need to take this to sleep and this, that. And it just really messes with your
Mhm.
mind, because then it's like, what's your reality? Like, even watching
Mhm.
the movie, you're confused because you're like, wait, what's real? Like, what is he actually experiencing and what isn't he
Yeah.
experiencing? And I can't
Yeah.
imagine being in that reality, how
Yeah.
scary and confusing that is to not even know what's real and what's not.
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know what, like, you know, and I think a lot of that does come from probably unprocessed trauma, and the system. And, I don't know what, if somebody's just born into that, or I don't know. It's kind of not confusing, but it's like, how do you get to that stage as opposed to like maybe taking another path of dealing it with, and where does it from maybe just being very spiritual or psychic or seeing things, right, to then being the other extreme of just being like hospitalized because you're seeing ghosts. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Yeah, I mean, you get to see people's charts. I mean, I don't read astrology, but when I think about all of that, there are some people where sometimes it's exactly the path,
Yeah.
that there is, and again, here is where we can sort of, I'm not saying this is the case for everybody, but there are sometimes roles that we are to play in a particular lifetime or experiences and paths where meant, that it's not wrong for us to go down, but from the outside, it can really appear a certain way when in fact that's actually the appropriate path in this lifetime. But again, yeah, it's exactly as you say.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go, what is actually real or not real? We could say the same thing
Mm.
in regards to where we're at collectively,
Yeah.
in the world. Like, what is actually going on right now? Because when you go back to, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 2000 to the 90s to the 80s to, we can see like there has been this massive shift in terms of like reality, things coming more and more, things coming to the surface collectively, but also so much becoming far more disintegrated and broken down on like what is actually real or what is actually true now. And, it's really where each of us are now being called to define that within greater parameters, I would say. Um, but yeah, 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 it makes it all a little bit bonkers.
It does. I know. And I think about that too. It's like even from the lens of manifestation, or like I'm creating my own reality. And I truly do believe that we all are, right? Like I think sometimes you can think about, or at least my mind can go so deep down that hole sometimes where it's like, okay, like I'm talking to you right now, right? And then I mean, I think science even proved like what was that the cat experiment, right? Where it's like, is the cat dead or is the cat alive? They put it in a box and you actually don't know if it's dead or alive. It's both. You know what I mean? And so like sometimes it's like we're having this conversation, but when we hang up and we're not in each other's realities, like we're not here, it's like, where are we each? It's just like a
Mhm.
weird thing. I'm like, I know that you exist, I see you, but then when I don't see you, it's like you're both there and you're not. And
That's true.
same
Yeah.
with me, right? So it's just like this really interesting, you can just, it can get you spinning sometimes, right? Where I'm like, is
Yeah.
this, when this person isn't in my life anymore, if I don't see them anymore, I mean, I know they go on to have their own existence somewhere else, but it's almost like, it's like that cat, Schrodinger's. Is
Yeah.
that what it's called? Schrodinger's experiment
I
with the
don't know.
cat.
I don't know that experiment. No, I'm gonna have to look it up. But
Yeah,
yeah, I know
yeah.
exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah,
it's
and
just, yeah.
no, but it's also then, our daily experience within ourselves.
Mm,
Is the reality. This is what's known, but here is what's unknown. Is that here? Is that not here? I've had that. There's this questioning of even our own experience, or there can be at least,
mm.
depending on where we're at.
Yeah. But I think that also helps me sometimes dealing with, whether it's shadow or just my authentic self, because it's sometimes I guess like there's sometimes a fear of like, what are you going to think about it? Or if I have to do something that's going to upset somebody else, then I think it helps me zoom back a little bit where it's like, okay, this is my reality. I'm the only one that when I go to bed at night, I'm the only one in here, right? So it's like I actually don't have to, I'm not responsible for whatever is happening, after we part ways. That's not my responsibility. And I think, as long as I'm not harming anybody, then that's
Yeah.
never my intention. But
Mm.
it helps me actually be more authentic because I can check in with myself and be like, okay, if I do this thing, I can kind of like look at it from that lens where it's like when we part ways, you go your way, you're going to be fine. Really. And I think
Yeah.
I try and explain that to my daughter a lot of times. She gets really worried about what people think about her. And I'm like,
Yeah.
in the most loving way possible, people don't care about you like that. They really don't.
Yeah.
They go on living their life. They go on complaining about something else. They go on find some
Yeah.
other drama
Yeah.
and you're here upset. You're holding on to it. And
Yeah.
even if they do for a day, like they'll get over it.
Yeah.
It's just like anything in the media. And
Yeah. Well, we're all policing each other. There's
mm,
that kind of, and that's really going back to a collective sort of conditioning that is a form of control. It's that censorship or self-censorship. that gets pushed down upon us around here are the rules. This is what is acceptable. This is not acceptable. And then we all police each other to stay within that bounds, regardless of whether what we're policing each other on is actually right or
Mm,
not. You know,
yeah.
um, COVID was a great example of that.
Yeah.
Huge and great example of that. They didn't have to do much other than pit each other against each other and create a
Yeah.
lot of division and link things as to here is the moral high ground and here is the people who are not. And then, everybody just really policed one another.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to question everything. Like even with this most recent election, first of all, I don't watch the news. I refuse to watch it anymore because I'm like, but I also think whenever you hear so much against one or the other, I think there's always an underlying agenda there. So it's always like just being curious, okay, like why am I following this or why am I believing this? Or like, and in the media is so much, it's so easy to like clip things and falsify things and put things out. And I
Oh,
think unless
I
you
like
actually have the source,
that's
I
right.
yeah, and I don't know, like I worked with myself in a way that I was not upset either way of what happened, right? And then I almost like gaslit myself because I went on social media and everybody was upset and like saying all these things and I was like, "Whoa, am I like wrong for not being that upset
Mhm.
right now?"
Mhm.
And I just had to like trust myself, and kind of that like
Yeah.
I'm creating my reality and my experience, and I think there's a lot out there that's trying to get us to do certain things and fall in line, and it's like,
The massive
you know
psyops. The massive
yeah,
psyops.
yeah,
Huge. It's
yeah,
it's again, MK Ultra never went away.
yeah,
MK Ultra never went away. They just took it from being able to use in a small kind of group of peoples for a period of
mm-hmm.
time, got what they needed and started to roll it out at a even more collective level.
Yeah,
When it comes to any government, it's the dark forces like it's not these. I mean, sure, there are impulses, that would be best way to describe it, but they are working with both sides. Like there is going to be influencing factors that are occurring within, any party, whether it's your guys' political system or ours. It's just the nature of it.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, why I think we just need to be aware. We need to have the information. And it's where I would say it's good to know the impulses. It's good to know the impulses and starting to learn like what is a more luciferic impulse? What sort
Mm-hmm.
of defines and describes that? And you start to get a sense of it. You start to get a sense of it in yourself. Then you start to notice it in others. You start to notice it in society. Okay, this is actually really helpful. Now I can know what I'm dealing with here. And then you start to know the other and you start to notice it in yourself or in others and in society. Right. Now I can know. Because these two forces are ultimately initiating forces. You fall onto one side, you're going to lose yourself. You fall to your other side, you're going to use yourself. You identify both and you take that middle path and you walk in that light, essentially, then these shadow elements or these impulses are going to be initiating you. You're going to be able to, develop and innovate for yourself or transmute, transform for yourself and for us as a collective in a way that is very potent. But either side is sort of battling. You could say these impulses again, they're battling in these beings, they're battling for, that for us to give ourselves to them, for us, for them to have that power and control.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I really like that distinction between those two. And it almost seems like there were points where you were describing them or talking about them. It almost seems like that Luciferic, like that like distraction is almost just like a tool of the Aramaic one.
Oh,
And
they
it could
work
be
together. No,
okay.
they work together.
Okay.
So technology again is really a great example. So you hop on your phone, you're scrolling, dopamine, 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 disassociation, disassociation coming
Mm-hmm.
out. the same time, we're losing our sense of self. We're becoming more of a shell. We're actually starting to get more hardened or more devoid and more materialized. So they're buddies. They can
Mm,
totally work together.
okay.
But then they have totally different factions as well. So transhumanism is super um, the Ahrimanic force, and going into mass control, smart cities or whatever they call them, like creating Earth increasingly becoming like commodified and technologized and everything increasingly becoming unnatural. Our foods, our farming, like everything we do, that's the Ahrimanic force and all
Mm,
sold to us as, this is better. And, have the chip implant or have the sunnies where you can access like anything and you don't ever need to learn anything. You're now actually no longer living from or your soul and your spirit and your alive consciousness. You're just a computing system that can do the thing, right?
yeah.
And then you've got the Luciferic, which is you're bringing in gender issues, you're bringing in sex issues, you're bringing in like um it's the Luciferic is the fall of Lucifer occurred in Lemuria, or it was the old moon period, but Lemuria, I'm pretty sure it was, yeah, the fall,
Mm,
which is in the Garden of Eden. And that was a matriarchal period of time. And that links into like the desires and feminine sex or like that whole stream, which is where you start to see that in the world or in yourself, losing oneself in pleasure or a lot of delusion too, mass amounts of delusion. Yeah, and we all have both elements within ourselves.
mhm,
Um, And there's no shame in that. It's really far more around how you can identify it and explore yourself through it and be able to see it in behaviors or choices or be able to see it in the world. Because this period of time we're in a period of time we're needing to clearly discern and get very clear on what is good and evil.
mm,
And that we can say that from a very righteous place or an uneducated place to some degree. But like when you start to delve into it, like people could go, I definitely know what's difference between good and evil. But then we've got things that are being sold as progressive or really innovative. And, it's like they're presented in this sort of gold wrapping, and yet where that may take us, no, that isn't necessarily then good. And we have to be able to have enough education and sort of forethought to sort of go, hang on, where are these streams ultimately going to lead us? Like this, I mean, I don't know, I'm going to take things very controversial, but this is what is a woman? Like questions like that, or what is gender? And all these different, and I'm not, I'm not having a personal anything against a person and how they want to identify it. But it is alarming when there wants to be so much breakdown of something that is also very anatomically um, what it is.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't, yeah, I could, yeah. No, but
No, I know. It's like it feels, I mean, talk about shadow, right? Because I'm like, what it's like, what can you say about it? And what are we not supposed to say about it? Because I honestly like asked my daughter out of just curiosity, right? 'Cause she's gone through her phases of, like 2, 3 years ago, she was wanted to be called a he. And then she was liked girls. And now so she's gone through her own thing. And then, so I asked her, I was like, can you explain to me like the plural, like the they, them? I honestly don't understand like that, what that, like that what's the word I'm looking for? Like the pronoun, I guess I just don't really understand, and just out of a curiosity space, but it's like she didn't really have an answer, but it I don't know, it's just interesting. And I think even like coming back to that, like what astrologers are calling age of Aquarius, or technology or anything like that, it is like you said, really discerning. And I think that's what this time is, like Pluto moving into Aquarius, right? It's really bringing us down to that, the darkness and the depth of like, okay, like what does this stuff actually mean? Like what is for our good, what is not, right? And I think that's what this Pluto time is and why it's so impactful, because there's a lot of technologies, like you said, the whole like chip in the brain, and it's Nikola Tesla, what he said, the secrets of the universe are in frequency, vibration, and energy, right? And it's like even relating to food, like the food that we're putting in our body is frequency. It is
Mhm.
impacting us. And I'm so like, I get so heated about like our food sources and what we're putting in, because we are consuming and it is changing us on such a cellular level. And we're consuming such high processed, like awful, like sugary, and it just allows us, I guess, to stay in this state of just not, like, unawareness. We're sick, we're just angry, we're all these things. And I mean, even going back to politics, like I don't know, like, but with RFK and the food, his attempt at reform, which who knows what will happen, but that is the only thing that kind of excites me a little bit. Is I'm like, if we can sort of change the ingredients that are in our food, then all these other bullshit issues that everybody's arguing, it's just going to be almost like a no-brainer. If we can get ourselves a little bit more healthy and a little bit more like individuated, and like, oh wow, like I actually know what it feels like to feel good now, or maybe I don't need to be on this medication, and I know that there's a larger agenda of big pharma and all those
Mhm.
things, so it's a big task. But it's like, even if we can bring awareness a little bit to what
Mhm.
we're putting on our body, to know that, these kids' cereals are like
Mhm.
poisoning our children. And we're
Mhm.
just right now, it's like, I mean, I'm not perfect by any means, right? But like I really have done a lot of like research on food, and I've always been very aware of like how it's made me feel. And so like we don't have cereal in our house. Like we don't have, I mean,
Mhm.
my kids still have Halloween candy, and my son even tonight he's like, "Can I have candy?" And I'm like, not tonight. Like I just don't want it to be like an
Yeah.
everyday thing, right? But I don't know. It's just when we're not in tune with our body, when we just always feel like shit, we don't know what that baseline feels like, you know, it's like I think that's the one thing that's helped me get in tune with my emotions and my body, and in
Mhm.
feeling what feels good is being able to. And I'll have a little chocolate peanut butter thing, like every now and again, because it
Oh
tastes
yeah.
good, but
Yeah.
I try and at least like know that the peanut butter is just peanut butter. There's not peanut butter and
Yeah.
sugar, and I just try and get the cleanest that I can. But
Mm.
you can only do so much in a country that
Mm.
everything is impacted
Mm.
in some way. It's like
Mm.
I would go to the store and you're buying strawberries. Like my kids would throw strawberries in the cart and it wasn't organic, but then like the non-organic. I mean, it's crazy how many chemicals and things are just in a fruit.
Son.
And it's like
Yeah.
it's overwhelming, because even that has so much impact on everything, like
Mhm.
their performance
Mhm.
at school, and school is a whole other thing. I'm like, I am struggling with school now, because I'm like, this is just not the place for most kids. Like, how do you
That's right.
deal with
Mhm.
the school system in a way that's like they'll about focus, or they don't want to do these things, they don't want to sit and do math, and I'm kind of like, at the end of the day, I want to write them back and be like, I don't care. Like, and it's not that I don't
Yeah.
care, but like it's just not, I'm not gonna yell at my kids or shame them or make them feel less than because they don't want to do it in math. Like
Yeah.
I don't, they're gonna find their creativity. Like my daughter just decided she wanted to do criminal psychology. So now she's like, well, mom, I have to like do better at school. So now she's applying herself a little bit more because she's found
Mhm.
something that's called to her. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's like, I wish I even looked at like the Waldorf schools, like the online ones, because I was like, can I do this? Like, is there a way that I could do it at home with them? And
Mhm.
it's just, society makes it hard because, I work, and, being
That's
home alone,
right.
like I don't have the ability to homeschool them in that way.
Yeah.
But even somebody sent me a clip from something that I don't know what book it is, and maybe the reference, but it was Rudolf Steiner, and he had said, obviously when he was alive, but he was like, there's going to become a point in time where we're vaccinating our children and we're detaching them from their spirituality. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's literally what's happening.
Yeah.
Literally.
It is.
And
It
so
is. Yeah. Exactly. And then that begs the question, if anybody is shows that, okay, we've got to learn actually what that actually then means and how that works with us in that spiritual science way. because that can still go, yes, you could feel the resonance of that or the truth of that when you read it. But then also, what does that actually mean?
Hmm.
It's also telling me that there's something more there. You know what I mean? You can see where it's like we are only aware of so much, and that the more that we would then learn here, the better that we're going to be able to influence or rebuild or recreate the certain kinds of like structures of how we educate or how we eat and how we, yeah.
Yeah. Well, even with the vaccines, I think that's another thing with RFK. He's talked a lot about. He's done a lot of research on vaccines, and and he's gotten a lot of pushback and a lot of, I guess, yeah, just negative things about coming out and being like these certain vaccines are causing autism or this, that, and the other thing.
Mm,
And I
mm,
think I think if I did ever have another child, I would view a lot of things very differently. And it
mm.
does make you an outsider, right? If you choose not to vaccinate your children, like everybody knows who you are, you know, as like people just, it's just you're being different. And, um,
Mhm.
I don't know. It's interesting,
Oh,
and there's so
mhm,
much to it. And I do think, there are, life-saving things, of course, that are so beautiful in what they
mhm.
do, but there's a lot of things that I think are so unnecessary, and we're just blindly following, and doing it.
Yeah, bullied into things. Or again, things becoming very inconvenient, so making it therefore challenging. So, yeah, I was not a vaccinator. I did not vaccinate my children, and
Mm,
that was like 20 years ago.
yeah.
That was more unheard of back then, and a lot of questions, a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of sacrifices that then has come with that in some regards. Are you going to be allowed into school, or are you going to be allowed into, childcare? Here are all the penalties for not agreeing. Here is reduction and any kind of support, basically, because you're not. And then you've got, yes, the kind of persecution of potential family members or friends,
Mhm.
or, yeah, you, I mean, it's a great experience, but at the same time, yeah, it comes at a cost, or you have to be willing to strengthen something. You have to face your own shadow.
Mhm.
That's what
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
that really, really does. And you have to be able, and you learn the expression of other people's shadow. And
Mm,
that's not saying that my way or my choice was the right choice. I have nothing against people if they want to vaccinate, or how they have to or want to or wish to educate, or what they believe in. That's completely your prerogative, and I will respect that. But it's no to, it's not to push your views onto mine, or mine onto yours. And it's being able to have that choice, rather than the persecution or ostracization, condemning. Yeah. So you get to really see and learn shadow,
yeah.
in all of those regards.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that takes a lot to stay firm with your decision in the face of all that. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know why I'm like that. I chose not to go on the pill either
Mm,
at 18,
yeah.
and that sort of flipped out my family, and then it was being told all these things and made to feel rubbish and wrong. And
Mm,
I remember when all the evidence started coming out around the effects of the pill.
yeah.
And yeah, I was in my 30s. I think I might have been like 30, 34, 35, and there was lots and lots more evidence. And oh my goodness, it was so like relieving and empowering, because I was made to feel like I'm just so rotten and so wrong and so reckless and such an idiot, like such a dummy. And like, what kind of thinking? You're off with the fairies, like all layers of projection. And I
Mhm.
just knew, and I was like, no, it's not right for me. I just know, just stick to it. And all the
Yeah.
proof, I'm like, huh, see? Friggin' did. And I didn't go
Yeah.
out and do that, but that's how
Yeah.
I felt. And I
Yeah.
felt, oh, relieved and
Yeah.
validated and pleased that I stuck to my guns. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just everybody's journey. It's just
Yeah.
everybody's journey. It doesn't matter when you come to your own realizations or discoveries. And that's the point. Like, it's the evolution of something that I've thought was really right. I now come to a point of going, whoa, didn't see that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, it's, yeah, how we grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know I was gonna my like wrapping up question was sort of be like, how do we work with our shadow and how do we move through it? And I know what my process has been, and I think we've touched on it, within this podcast. And like you just said, everybody has their own journey of when they're going to experience it and when not. And I think it's, I don't know, it is challenging and it's confusing for a while.
Mm.
Um, but there are things like I don't even now there like today there was something a conversation I was almost avoiding having. And for
Mm.
me now, when I feel that way, I challenge myself to do it because
Mm.
it's that I think that's how you're overcoming those shadows, right? It's all those little voices inside that are just like, oh my gosh, you're going to be rejected. They're going to get mad at you. This is a stupid, you don't need to do this. But then every single time I listen to that voice, I get home and
Mm.
it's like, oh, you should have just done it. Why were you afraid of? You know what I mean? It's this battle, internal battle. And so I just try and I don't know. Now I just try and push myself to like like
Well, it's
what's the
that's the
worst?
honoring of yourself.
Mm,
That's the honoring of yourself. So when you listen to those voices and you don't do it, you're betraying or you're
yeah.
self-abandoning,
Yeah.
and it's harming you.
Mm,
And so it's kind of going, no, like I want to, like, I value me. I love who I am. I'm increasingly falling in love with who I am. I'm really getting to know the kind of person I am and how I care, and I'm going to represent that. And so I'm going to come out and have those challenging conversations or be very honest or transparent. And, how they respond, is beyond my control. But
mm-hmm,
I can kind of know I ideally approach that in the best manner. I worded things, I expressed myself truthfully, and I honored myself in that way.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. Because yeah, those shadows are really, that is the almost like the conditioning and programming and control mechanisms and quality of energy, certain kind of vibrational state that we're accustomed to. And so that will get very loud in order to sort of keep us with what is comfortable and yet uncomfortable to our soul and spirit.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's been the huge, it's like I said, that discomfort of yeah, not listening to yourself and continually abandoning yourself. It's like, then you're just like, who am I?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, even my daughter trying to navigate all of this, I always tell her, I'm like, I love myself. I've learned to love myself, but I don't like myself every single moment of every day, right? Like there are moments where maybe I'll hear that voice of like, don't do that. And I don't do it. And then I'm like, oh, I get so mad at myself, right? But then I can also witness that and just let it go and be like, okay, I'll have another opportunity because that's the way it works. There's always going to be a new time to like move through that. This isn't like the end all be all just because I didn't do it this one time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just I don't know. It is confusing, but it is empowering and um I don't know.
It's a lifelong journey, I think. We're not
Lifetimes,
even,
I feel like.
what was that? Sorry?
Lifetimes.
Oh, 100%
Yeah.
lifetimes.
Yeah.
Lifetimes upon lifetimes upon, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what we do in this lifetime influences our next.
Yeah.
We're literally working upon our astral and spirit bodies, so our soul bodies and spirit bodies. And that's what we pick up when we come back down and come back through.
Hmm.
Um, Going through the gates of death, we slowly relieve the layers of our body through these planetary planes, essentially, or heavenly planes. And then on the descension journey, and that takes a long process. And on the incarnational journey, we then, have re-refined ourselves in some regards, but also pick up our kind of little packages that we left on each plane that then influence how we are in the next life.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, yeah. There's so much, I
Oh,
feel
so
like. But
much.
yeah, but I think this conversation has been really, really deep and beautiful. And I think um Yeah, I don't know. Was there anything that we didn't talk about that you really wanted to bring up? Anything? Yeah.
No, I think we touched on lots of different
Mhm.
things. Thank you.
Yeah. No, of course. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you on here and to speak with you. Yeah.
Good fun.
Yeah.
I like where you go. I like where you go.
I know. I'm always like, I just it like it's so fun to have somebody that likes to go deep because I remember one of my first conversations with somebody in like the spiritual. This was like years and years ago, but they're like, you really have to be careful what you say to people because certain like perspectives or like that kind of when you look at trauma from not a positive lens, but like it's for your soul, right? Or like people, she's like people just don't understand that, and you like be careful. And I don't know, something about that was like, but like I don't know, I want to explore it all. I want to go to all the places because that's just
Yeah.
and people will tell me they're like you're really like just in like everyday life, right, that maybe are not super spiritual, they're like you're really open about things, and I just feel like I don't know, for me it's like what's the point not to,
Yeah.
like
Or just even know what is true for you.
mm,
And and that may change and evolve as
yeah,
well. But for
yeah,
right now, this is what I know is true for me, whilst then also, again, just being interested or curious and open to other people's experiences or perspectives or new
mm-hmm,
information. I
yeah,
don't think like it just sort of to me makes a lot of sense. We're all very individual and we all have our own unique path. There is not one right path. And that there is, nothing is just one-sided. Everything is multifaceted. And
mm-hmm,
so we need each other to be able to sort of share different experiences or communicate from different perspectives or to actually know something. We could see like I think Steiner also says or encourages for observation to be done on an item, like I think over 7 or 8 perspectives, or is it there's a certain angles. You can't just know something by looking
mm-hmm,
at it way. It's being able to observe and know it from all these different angles. And then you're going to see that thing in an entirely different light with potentially entirely different functions and processes.
mm-hmm.
And that's really what we're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like all truths exist at once.
Yeah.
There's like there's your truth, there's my truth, there's someone else's truth, and it doesn't like no one's wrong. But
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
you wanted to say
I'm like,
something, but I
oh
mean,
my God. Maybe when we bring in the good and evil stuff, and then I'd be like, yeah, no,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
wrong. Now,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
that's like no, but yeah,
yeah,
I know what you're speaking to also. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
if there's any way like people can work with you or find you, I mean, I'll link everything in the show notes. And if anyone's listening, go get your deck. I love it. I pull it. My daughter and I
Oh,
too. And when she was in that group thing too, she was like, "Mom," and she's like, "So many people in there pull like tarot cards, and they're really into astrology. And it's just like in school, nobody believes in astrology. Tarot's the devil." And then she gets in this really like kind of mental health facility space, and
yeah,
people are like connecting through
yeah,
God through all these sources. So kind of like tying that in. But we
yeah,
when she saw your deck, she's like, "Oh my God, I love it. Can we pull some cards?" I was like, "Yeah, let's do it."
yeah,
It's
yeah.
beautiful.
She's a goodie. She's a
She
goodie.
is. She is. Well, thank you. Of
Thank you for having me. It's been
course.
lovely to chat to you.
Yeah.